line. It's now actually Rogers Avenue, for those of you who know the neighborhood. For reference, I put some other streets here. This is Devon. This is Toohey. This one that I didn't put a street on is Howard Street. This is Western, and this is Kedzie. And here we are at Devon, Kedzie and Toohey, and X marks the spot where Winston Towers site sits today. It's north of the Indian boundary line, which is supposed to be Indian territory, right? Well, after the treaty was signed, it didn't last for very long, and there was conflict, and as more settlers came, they started trying to spread out further. There was a lot of conflict between the settlers and the Indians, and by 1833, there was another treaty called the Treaty of Chicago. And in that one, the Indians finally just ceded all claim or control of the land in northeastern Illinois to the United States. They were pushed, there's no other word for it, either north to Wisconsin or west to the Kansas Territory. These are the Potawatomi, the Ottawa, and the Ojibwe peoples. So by 1833, the US government had control of all of northeastern Illinois. And what they did then was survey the land, divide it up into sections, and get it ready to be sold, or in some cases actually given away to encourage settlement in the West. The way they did that was through land warrants. This is a land patent that was granted to someone with a familiar name, Philip Rogers. It's for the northern half of the property that Winston Towers sits on today. Philip Rogers came to Chicago in around 1840, or not exactly sure when, and he started acquiring land. His first land patent from the US government came as one of the first granted in the area in 1843. A homestead that was roughly at Western and Lunt Avenue. That was his original farmhouse and farm property. But almost immediately he started acquiring other land. And in 1848, he got title to this property, 40 acres here at Toohey and Kedzie. And by the time he died in 1856, he owned 1,600 acres that is spread out all over, but most of Rogers Park and West Ridge were originally owned by, or at one time owned by, Philip Rogers. The bottom half of this property was granted through another document, this being it, to a man named Samuel Wilder. Samuel Wilder was a military veteran, the War of 1812, and he was granted a military warrant. Military warrants in the 19th century were kind of like the GI Bill of today. They were rewards for military service that were given, and they were given in the form of land in the new unsettled territory in the American West. So this one was granted to Samuel Wilder, a private in Captain Capp's company, 6th Regiment New York Artillery in the War of 1812. So we had to look him up and find out what his story was. He was a farmer in Huntsville, New York. He was in the militia that defended the shoreline of Lake Ontario near the Canadian border. One of the major battles he was in was the Battle of Sackett's Harbor, which had very important strategic importance in the war because it prevented the British from getting control of the Great Lakes. But this was issued in 1853, and by 1853, Samuel Wilder was a 61-year-old farmer with a bunch of kids who lived and died in Huntsville, New York. So what was he doing with Chicago land? We looked up Huntsfield on the map and we found a couple of interesting things. One, Huntsfield is in upstate New York, right at the Canadian border, right next to Watertown, which is where Philip Rogers also came from. So there's a lot of traffic in the early days from this area of upstate New York and from Vermont through the Great Lakes and across Michigan down to Chicago. Lots of our early settlers came from that area of the East Coast. The other thing about Huntsfield and Watertown being right next to each other, there's another coincidence. Samuel Wilder's oldest son, Alden, was about the same age as Philip Rogers, and he came to Chicago at about the same time, early 1840s. He was here, the earliest record we see is 1843. So we don't know if Philip Rogers and Alden Wilder knew each other in New York, but we know they ended up owning property contiguous to each other here in West Ridge. Alden Wilder has a interesting record. He was a school teacher in one of the first public schools that was established in the city of Chicago. This is a record from 1843 that shows he had 130 students in his classroom, which would have made the teachers union explode. But he worked in this school for at least 10 years because he was a teacher and then a principal until 1853, which coincidentally or not, just happens to be the same year that that land patent was granted to his father. It also was the same year that he went back east, got married, and came back to Chicago with his new bride, Lucy, and started a new career. He went into business as a partner with Samuel Chase, another person whose name is kind of familiar to our neighborhood. Chase Avenue is named after him. Samuel Chase was a major real estate person, developer, landowner, entrepreneur, and mostly operating out of Lakeview Township and Chicago itself. And then he became partners with Alden Wilder, and the two of them started acquiring properties all through Evanston Township, which at that time included Rogers Park and West Ridge. Here's our property at Winston Towers right here, and all of this is kind of Rogers Park and West Ridge. And then as you go up, the other purple X's are parcels that Alden Wilder and Samuel Chase owned in 1862, which is when this map was drawn. By then, Alden and his wife Lucy and their 4 children were living in Evanston. We saw them in the 1860 census, in the 1870 census, and in newspaper mentions of the society news. They were wealthy people, so they got noticed when they gave a party or did anything like that. And then up until 1870, they seemed to be living kind of a normal life. And then the record goes kind of quiet for a little while. We think Lucy died in 1871. We found a death record for Lucy Wilder in June of 1871. We're not 100% sure it's her, but I would say it's probably 80% sure it's her. She left Alden, if that was in fact her, she left Alden with 4 children, all under the age of 14. The next thing that happened was October 8th through 10th, 1871, a day shall live in infamy, the Chicago fire, which caused chaos in the city, a lot of disruption, a lot of the records were destroyed, which may be partly why we have a problem. Someone's not muted. Why we have a problem with finding what happened to Alden, because the next thing we hear or find mention of Alden is in November and December of 1871, this ad started running in the Chicago Tribune, which was a list of all the claims for life insurance that had been paid out by this particular insurance company as a result of the fire. And here we have A.G. Wilder got $950. Somebody got $950. We're not exactly sure who, because this was published in December, and in January, just a few weeks later, we see this notice which says that an executor was appointed to administer the estate of Alden G. Wilder, deceased, and he also was appointed guardian of the minor heirs for the estate. So we know that Alden Wilder died at around the time of the Chicago fire. We have no idea of what or when or how or where he's buried, but by following the disposition of his estate over the next few years, we do know kind of what happened. The children, who were orphans by that time, were all sent off to boarding schools. They left the Chicago area. They grew up, they went to college, they were socially prominent. They never lived in Chicago again. So they kind of fade from the story, and we won't go into their story today, although it's kind of interesting. We know that in about 1880, the land owned by Alden by then down at Winston Towers was sold to a man named Michael Weber, who immediately then resold it to his son Bernard. So Michael Weber was one of the early settlers of Chicago. We don't know a lot about him, but he lived in Lakeview, and his son Bernard was born in Lakeview, which was a separate village at that time. Bernard was a politician. He was very active in Lakeview politics. He was a city council member in Lakeview, and then when Lakeview was annexed to Chicago, he became a Chicago alderman. He served on the Board of Elections for a while. He served on a commission to extend Lakeshore Drive north. He was on a park board. He was a kind of a mover and shaker in that regard. He also was married to one of the daughters of Nicholas Krantz, who those of you who know Edgewater history will recognize as one of the early landowner farmers and real estate developers in Edgewater at the time. So in Chicago terms, Barney, as he was often known, was pretty connected. He was one of the people making things happen in Chicago. He also was in the brick business. In the 1870s, after the fire, the brick making business in Chicago exploded because, of course, after the fire, building codes would not allow reconstruction of anything in wood, had to use fireproof materials, and bricks were the most logical fireproof material. By 1880, Chicago brick yards were making 600 million bricks a year. I have to say that slowly because it's hard to comprehend, but they were a huge brick making machine. Chicago was the brick capital of the country and remained that way for probably 30 or 40 years going into the 20th century. We've all heard of Chicago Common Brick, and that's kind of what they were making. Barney, sensing a business opportunity, as he did, started buying up land all over kind of the outskirts of the city, including properties in West Ridge. He had a brickyard also in Evanston around Oakton Street. So he owned a lot of the brickyards that were in our immediate area. These are his brickyards from West Ridge. This is the Winston Towers property here. So that's Toohey and Kedzie, although there was no Kedzie Avenue there. This is Devon, and then this is Devon. So this map should really be right underneath this one. So Barney had two sites that were brickyards along Kedzie Avenue, or what would become Kedzie Avenue at that time. Partly because that's where his railroad spur went and ended in what was called Weber Station. He advertises it down here in this ad, that was at Oakton Street in Evanston, where he had another brickyard. So he had a lot of land and influence in the brick business. When you have a brickyard, you need three things. You need the railroad spur, you need an open land area where you can excavate clay, and then you need a place where you can manufacture the clay by forming it into bricks and firing it, and then putting it on the train to take it off to market. So all of that was located on each of these brickyard facilities. Now you notice, if you can see it on your screen, that this yard is actually called Illinois Brick Company, was owned by Illinois Brick Company, not Bernard Weber, partly because this is a later map. And in 1890, Barney was one of a consortium of brickyard owners who joined together to form what can only be called a cartel to control the brick market. They called that company Illinois Brick Company. They all put a lot of their property into the name of Illinois Brick Company, and they did things like set prices and do their best to withstand the forces of organized labor. They had a lot of conflicts with the unions, and Barney was right there, union busting at every opportunity. Some of the stories of the strikes and the lockouts and the conflict are actually pretty interesting. If anybody's interested in labor union history, there was a lot of it going on at that time. But the property ended up always under the control of Illinois Brick Company, and Illinois Brick prospered as there were building booms all over the country. There's an ad from, I think this is about 1910, that touted Chicago brick as the world's best building material. It says, Chicago has the brick habit. It is built of brick. More bricks are used in building in Chicago than in any other American city. And Illinois brick makes 1/20th of all the common brick made in the United States. The reason, of course, and this is where the ad talks about this, is that bricks were fireproof, and fireproof construction in Chicago was a big deal at this time, around the turn of the 20th century. Every building advertised itself as being fireproof construction, and that was important to buyers, both as a result of the Chicago fire, and then when the Iroquois Theater fire came, that probably added to it as well. So Illinois brick prospered. There were building booms all over. There was a huge building boom in the 1920s. They didn't call it the Roaring 20s for nothing. All of West Ridge essentially was built in the 1920s. There was almost nothing in West Ridge before that except the brickyard. And by 1930, all the streets that we know were put in, and all the housing except in the very northeastern corner of West Ridge was built. And I would be willing to say that most of the brick that went into the buildings in Rogers Park and West Ridge that were built in the 20s, which were most of the buildings, came from this very brickyard, or some of them in the surrounding area. And then came the Depression. Construction halted. The brick business dried up. And by 1932, Illinois Brick was managing to stay in business, but it closed a lot of brickyards, including this one. What do you do with an abandoned brickyard? The answer is mostly nothing. They just kind of let it go, let it sit there. They still retained the ownership of the property, but it essentially reverted back to nature. The clay pit, which had been a big hole, filled up with water and was allowed to fill up with water because nobody was taking clay out of it anymore. And it attracted migrating birds and wildlife, kind of like what they're saying is happening in the parks and forest preserves now as a result of the COVID shutdown. Nature kind of came back. And if you talk to people who grew up in Rogers Park and West Ridge in the 40s and the 50s, they will tell you about the clay pit and about their childhood in the clay pit. One of them wrote a memoir for us last year for our website, Mike Zimmerman, who lived in West Ridge in the 40s and 50s, around California and Harwell, I think, something like that. Here's what he said about the clay pit. Down the block westward was a multi-acre wildlife area. The clay pit apparently served in the 1930s as a source of material for making bricks. Its wilderness-like atmosphere included swamps and ponds with reeds, brush, trees, birds, squirrels, skunks, snakes, frogs, and fish. My best buddy and I found an abandoned cement mixing tub at a nearby former construction site, hauled it to the clay pit, hid it in the reeds and overgrowth, and used it as a raft, poling through clay pit waters, exploring the wildlife. So it was kind of idyllic for the kids. Mike named his memoir Huckleberry Idyllic in West Ridge and compared himself to Huckleberry Finn poling his raft down the Mississippi. Unfortunately, the adults in the neighborhood were a little less enamored with the clay pit, however. They started complaining about it as the Depression was ending and West Ridge was developing and these houses started being built. You can see in the background of these pictures in the late 1930s and early 1940s. They said it was being used as a dumping ground, that there was garbage there, that it was creating smells that invaded the neighborhood, that there was smoke, that there was noise, other pollution. They feared the loss of their property values. And this went on as over 10 years of battling against this clay pit by the surrounding neighbors. There would be a complaint, the company would make some kind of amends or reach some kind of a settlement, agree to do better, whatever. They would violate it, the neighbors would complain again, they'd take them to court, there'd be another suit, there'd be another settlement, there'd be another suit, back and forth, back and forth. At one point, the West Ridge Neighborhood Association had 1,500 members who would show up to community meetings and pressure their local politicians. And that finally had an effect. In 1952, the city council rezoned the clay pit area from use for manufacturing and commercial use to residential use only. That prompted the Illinois Brick Company to realize that the only way they were going to ever get rid of this property and make any money from it was to do landfill and make it suitable for residential development. So that started in 1952. And for the rest of the 50s, the land was gradually being filled, the clay pit hole was gradually being filled. And by 1964, it was ready to be built on. At that point, the land was sold to the Winston Company for $1.5 million. And they proposed a huge housing complex. That housing complex became Winston Towers. It's 960 some apartments, I think, were scheduled to be built there. And they were condominiums, which was a new-ish idea in Chicago at the time. They were advertised by the Winston Muss Company as Chicago's newest and finest condominium apartment homes. Now, Winston Muss knew that their competition for buyers for these buildings would be the growing, developing suburbs where you could get your own single-family house. Ranch houses were very popular. So they talked about these apartments as having ranch house roominess, but resort at-home fun, all for less than the cost of renting. So they were trying to attract first-time home buyers to Winston Towers as an option instead of having them move to Skokie or move to Lincolnwood or move to, Rolling Meadows or whatever was the latest, hottest suburb at the time. They continued that sales pitch all the way through the selling period, which lasted about 6 years. This is an ad for Building 3, where we'll be visiting, that ran in 1960. No exterior maintenance to worry about. You have beautiful landscaping that you don't have to take care of. You have central heat and central air conditioning with all the latest individual controls. You have a private swimming pool on the property, the latest, fanciest kitchen with all push button features, it says. All 21 minutes from the Loop, CTA bus service at your door, a desirable West Rogers Park address surrounded by luxurious private homes. So that was Winston Towers, and it must have worked because these buildings sold very, very well. They also ran a continuous kind of public relations campaign where they placed a lot of articles in the real estate sections of the newspapers. These are just some that ran in the Tribune. There was probably at least one a month in the Tribune real estate section for years as the tower complexes were being built. They would do articles like this one that talks about kitchens being the hub of family life, and lo and behold, it's illustrated by a floor plan of the new Winston Towers apartments. Here's another one that says today's bedrooms are larger because beds are larger. King-size beds were just becoming popular at that time. And they talked about how in a Winston Towers apartment, your bedroom would be big enough that you wouldn't have to worry that you wouldn't have room for a king-size bed. Every time one of the towers was completed, they do a topping off ceremony, run the flag up the flagpole, and get an article in the newspaper. This one is for Tower 3, which was completed in 1968. At that time, the article says there were already 400 people living in the 400 families living in the first and second towers. The new tower people would start moving in 250 units, and a fourth tower, which had only been announced a few months before and was just starting construction, was already 40% sold. So the sales campaign was quite aggressive and quite effective. Part of how they could do all the pre-selling was that they did have model apartments set up, decorated in the latest, greatest, fanciest 1960s style. And one of those apartments survived with its decor from the 1960s just about totally intact, and was put on the market in 2016. The listing got noticed by somebody and it went viral on the internet. And here's what went viral about it. It was called the Austin Powers Apartment. And it was in this over the top 1960s decor, complete with all the wallpaper and the round seating, the sectional. I don't know, I was around in the 1960s. I never saw an apartment like this. I don't know what they did. But we found posts and newspaper articles about this apartment as far away as Australia and London and Rockford, Illinois. It was everywhere. I don't know what happened to this apartment when someone did buy it. I don't know if they kept the wallpaper. I'd love to know if anybody out there knows who owns this apartment and knows what they did with it. Let me know. I'd be really curious. But this is the Austin Powers apartment. The one thing I know is that our apartment for today has been updated and brought into the 21st century. It's quite lovely. And we have our wonderful homeowner host to show us around. So let's take a tour with Bob and Christine Hartwood.
Welcome to Winston Tower number 3. Hi, we're Bob and Christine, and this is our apartment here in Winston Tower. We bought the condo in 2011, and we had purchased it from the original owners. They had bought here in 1968 when the building was first being built. One of the interesting features of the building is the front facade itself. It definitely has that mid-century modern look to it. It was originally designed in the early 60s. This is the 3rd building that was built, and so they all have the same sort of design, but that mid-century modern look with the overhang over the doorway, where the cars, the sheltering carport, I guess you'd call it. It has a really cool look, and then the lobby very much looks like it's out of 1960s. That's an interesting feature of the building.
A lot of people will comment on that, like when they first walk in and see the lobby, it's like you step back in time, and then you come in and you come up into our apartment, and it's like completely modern, like you're in the modern world. So it's an interesting like juxtaposition of old and new. And what also is interesting, I was just speaking with my daughter about this, because we have made kind of friends with people in other units as well. Every unit that's redone is a little bit different. So there's no like one standard rehab that everyone does when they modernize their apartment. So it's really interesting to go in and out and see kind of what people have done to like fit the needs of the modern day family. And what attracted us to this particular layout was that we still, we have 3 children and we still had 1 at home. So when we moved into this condo permanently, we brought with us our youngest daughter. So we wanted to have enough room so that our kids would feel like this was still very much their home. And we also wanted to have room for our kids, if they came back to live with us for a little bit, moved around in Chicago in their lives. We really liked the layout of this apartment. Some things that we really wanted to improve though were we wanted to have an open floor plan, and back when the condo was built, the kitchen was enclosed with a door so that you could cook, close your door, and eat in a formal dining room. And so we took out a lot of walls and kind of reconfigured the condo to make the kitchen kind of the focal point. Since we do entertain on Christmas Eve, my family, we have about 30 people here. We wanted to make sure we had enough room that people would be comfortable. And since people tend to congregate in the kitchen, we really wanted to kind of make the emphasis of enlarging our kitchen.
And that was one of the things that drew us to Winston Towers. In the old advertisements, they would say that it was like having a ranch house, but in the sky. And so that similar size is something that we're definitely attracted to be able to have people over, 20, 30 people. It would not be able to do in a normal size condo.
And we worked really hard with our contractor, who they gave us 3 options for our kitchen. They drew us 3 different plans, and this is what we picked. And the reason we picked this was, originally our kitchen ended at this wall over here. And it was really kind of like a galley kitchen. There was an actual door leading out into that was the dining room. So what was extending this long island because we did want to still have seating area when we all were together here eating. And we wanted some storage space. So it's really nice to have storage underneath this giant, it's 10 feet, I think, right? Counter. It just really allowed us to have like a really functional kitchen. So take, for instance, when we have parties, this whole counter will be covered with food and like hors d'oeuvres and things like that, and then the meal, and that way people can kind of circulate through the kitchen and sit anywhere they want to eat. Another thing they suggested when we did the remodel was our sink was originally here, because we had like cabinets running in across here, and so
And the stove was here.
and the stove was here, so they recommended us moving the sink to the window, so it would just be nicer when you are doing dishes or just doing chores here to be able to look out through the window. Another thing we miss is not having a pantry. That was hard to put in because they recessed some walls to fit like a larger refrigerator and the modern refrigerator. So we ended up just getting kind of like a standalone pantry, which has worked for us. Also, the doorways they were lower. They had like a framing to them. So we just had them take it out and just kind of make everything really simple lines and just really clean lines in here. But yeah, overall, the kitchen is kind of our favorite place really to be. It's functional, it has all the room that we need, and it's just kind of a place to gather.
Well, and when we originally did the design, Chris had asked, are you sure that the island isn't too big? And the designer's like, don't worry, it will never seem too big. And that has really proven true.
Yeah, I was like, 10 feet, that's really, really large, but she actually really knew what she was doing and really kind of met our needs on that. And so when we went through the whole rehab, we actually lived through our rehab of the condo, so it was a little bit interesting to not have like a kitchen for a while and only have one bathroom at a time. But we were really thrilled with the result. There wasn't a lot that we could keep from the original like features of the condo. So we looked for little things that we could keep. So for instance, if you'll notice in the video, you'll see the old door buzzer in our hallway. The contractors originally said like, hey, we'll take this out. And we were like, no, please save that. Like, we think it's just like a really cool feature and something original.
One of the things we try to do too is try and keep everything modern. In the seating area, you can see we have modern chairs, modern shelves and that. But we also wanted to keep that mid-century modern aesthetic as well. So like the fireplace and a couple of the lamps have more of that mid-century modern look.
Yeah, we want to incorporate kind of modern with the mid-century pieces. So there are a few like bigger pieces like the TV stand, like Bob mentioned, the fireplace and lamps and things, just some little nuances to make sure that we still kind of kept the integrity of the time period in which this was built.
One of the things we like about the bedrooms is that they were all pretty nice size. The largest bedroom, the one that we're using now, has the bathroom in it and a large walk-in closet, but even the other two bedrooms that are a little bit smaller are still pretty large for a bedroom, and it has a lot of closet space, which we did like even now for storage. One of the things we really like about the condo too is the view from the balcony. We have a great view of downtown, and there's a lot of green space around the building itself. The park is right there, and we have a lot of open space, so that is really a great feature of this. It's a beautiful view and a lot of fresh air and open space.
Yeah, we do a lot of walking around the neighborhood, so there's the trail on McCormick, and now they've connected the bike trail through like the park that runs along along Bryn Mawr to Foster. And also just being able to walk through the neighborhood. There's some really beautiful like architectural homes that we like to look at. And again, the green space is also what attracted us to this condo. Our unit is at the end of the long hallway. So we have a corner unit, which means that we should only share a common wall with 2 other neighbors. And we do have like beautiful views. It's very peaceful. It's quiet. It's nice to sit out on the balcony in the morning and at night. At night, we get a really beautiful view of the Chicago skyline. And sometimes we'll get like the lights from Wrigley Field. We can see fireworks from downtown all the way to like Rosemont.
All right, thanks for joining us on our tour of our ranch in the sky.
And thank you, Bob and
Welcome.
oh, sorry, there we go. All right, thank you, Bob and Chris. Sarah, do we have questions? We're ready for questions or comments at this point.
Sure. Somebody asked, was the Treaty of St. Louis signed in St. Louis?
Yes. Simple answer. St. Louis was like a major Western metropolis at that time. And yes, it was the probably westward most city in the area in 1816, right on the Mississippi and yes, it was signed there. Another question?
Yes, sorry, hold on, because they're coming in too. So another question, so I'm starting from the beginning. So this is kind of the beginning part of the presentation.
Sure.
Do we know how much Samuel Wilder paid for the southern portion of the property under the military warrant?
He did not pay anything. It was given to him as a reward for his military service. So that was the point of military warrants. You cashed it in and you got the land. Probably people may have heard over the years the expression 40 acres and a mule, which is kind of what the slaves wanted as reparations after the Civil War. And that was kind of the tradition. You got land as your pension reward for the military. They gave military warrants to veterans of the Mexican War, the War of 1812, the Indian Wars that, of course, were happening all along, and it was the money that the government had to give out. They didn't have cash money, so they gave out land.
This is in reference to the map you showed, and one question was, what was the original southern border of Evanston? We know it now as Howard.
Evanston, the map that I showed was Evanston Township, which is different from the city of Evanston. Evanston Township was one of the ways of organizing the property in Cook County. There was Evanston Township, there was Lakeview Township, there was Jefferson Township. All the different townships had different boundaries, and they were separate from the city of Chicago, which was very much smaller at that time. So Evanston Township went down to Devon Avenue, but eventually Rogers Park and West Ridge were both organized as villages, and then those villages were annexed to the city of Chicago in 1893. So Evanston itself never extended as far down as that map. That was Evanston Township.
Okay, and then somebody says, I thought Westridge was first settled by Luxembourg farmers. And I'm just pulling that from the question. I don't know what Luxembourger is.
They're people from Luxembourg.
Oh.
Yes, many of the original settlers Actually, it was earlier, even before it was called Evanston Township, it was called Ridgeville and Ridgeville Township. And Ridgeville was all along the ridge, which if you think of Ridge Boulevard, that was the early settlement area. And many of the first newcomers, founding families who came and got land there were from Luxembourg, and some were from Germany. Germany didn't exist then. It was Prussia and all these different little Bavaria, principality kinds of things. But yes, many of them were from Luxembourg. They settled around St. Henry's Church, which was Devon and Ridge approximately, and owned the land all going all the way west to Kedzie. And then there were also Irish. Philip Rogers was Irish. There were lots of immigrant people that came and bought up the land, got land patents, bought the land from each other. It's a fascinating time period when those farms were all along the ridge. There's maybe 10 or 15 sort of founding families who lived in Ridgeville as farmers. And some were Luxembourgers and some were not.
Interesting. Did anyone ever live in the Austin Towers apartment, or was it always a display unit?
I think somebody lived there. I think they bought it. I mean, there's no way they would have kept it as an empty model apartment for 40 years. Yeah. So somebody lived there and apparently liked the decor well enough to keep it. And then the next person, I don't know, if they bought it because of the decor or bought it in spite of the decor. Like I said, I'd love to know.
Somebody asked, was there a restriction on having children live there?
I don't know. My immediate reaction is I doubt it, because they were selling against your own little American dream house out in the suburbs. And that was when the baby boom was in full force. I don't think they would have banned children, or they wouldn't have been selling those apartments. I do know one of those articles I showed talked about they had originally thought the bigger apartments would be more for families with little kids, but a lot of them were being bought by older couples, kind of like the Hartwigs, who wanted to make sure that their older kids had someplace to come home to. So I guess the answer must be no. They didn't ban children.
Unless there was
ban children now either, I don't think. I mean, I think there's kids that live there.
Unless there was a whole Austin Powers Tower.
Yeah, with no kids. Yeah.
With no children.
Yeah. So.
Somebody asked, but also answered, are all the units in Winston Towers the same size?
No, there's 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And I don't know if any of them have been combined to make even larger apartments over the years, but they were planned as 1, 2, and 3 bedroom.
This last question is just, about where it's at. It says, is this building next to the Lincolnwood Senior Residence Complex?
It's north, I believe. I'm not sure exactly where the Lincolnwood Senior Residence Complex is. People know where the Bernard Horwich Center is, the Jewish Community Center on Toohey, just before Kedzie. That's immediately to the east of the complex, and the building that we were talking about is the one that's the furthest east of all the buildings in Winston Towers. So I don't know where. I mean, Lincolnwood Senior Complex must be over the border in Lincolnwood, and there's the sanitary canal is in between Chicago and Lincolnwood along Kedzie. Kedzie's the city limits, but then there's a sanitary canal, and then there's Lincolnwood Town Center is right across the river from this complex.
So that's the last of the questions, but I just want to point out that Nicolette, we should thank Nicolette Anashini for doing the video.
Oh, thank you for acknowledging her. I did not know who that was.
Yeah,
She's a friend of the Hartwigs, and she bumped you out of doing this video, but
yeah,
you're doing the next two.
she did a really good job.
Good do. Nice job. Very good.
So let me just check the message board to see if there are actually no more questions. Just, thank you.
Okay. Well, before we go, I just want to remind you of the next stops on our virtual house tour. We're taking next Sunday off, but on September 27th, we will be visiting a classic Rogers Park 2-flat. One that on the outside looks like many, many others in the neighborhood, and you'll learn why that is, actually, why so many of the 2-flats in our neighborhood look the same. It was built in 1910. It's on Newgard Avenue. It's currently owned by a very sweet, very charming property owner who will show you around the building in a video that Sarah did record, and it's just a lovely little glimpse into that building. On October 4th, we will be on Sheridan Road near Rogers, a home that was built in 1922 that has a beautiful garden attached to it and an art gallery in the backyard. And the whole home is full of art. You will be interested in that one. It's something not to be missed. On October 11th, we'll be going to a home built around 1900 on Greenleaf near Greenview in Rogers Park, kind of just east of the Glenwood, I guess, is the other street. It's got a very interesting history, and it's currently occupied by a woman whose parents bought the house in 1983. So she has memories of growing up there and now lives there herself, and will give us a video tour that is quite lovely. And then on October 18th, we will finish up back in West Ridge at the Park Gables Apartments. For those of you who don't know, that's at Estes Avenue, just north of Indian Boundary Park. It's the building with the gables, very large, 72 units of different size apartments, built in 1928 with a fascinating story and some beautiful amenities. So that's going to be an interesting tour. Remember that you have to register separately for each week so that we can give you a unique Zoom link to join the meeting. You can do that on our website, and while you're on our website, look for announcements of other programming. We're working on things right now for November and December, and we will be announcing those shortly. And then just before we go, one last time, a reminder, we really do need your support. So if you're on our website, you can do any of these things to help us out. Join or renew your membership. You can make a donation, buy our books, or make your own property history request for a project. And maybe you'll be featured in the next virtual house tour if we ever have to have one, if this pandemic never ends. I hope not. Anyway, with that, I will end the meeting. Thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of the evening. And I hope to see you all again in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Donna. Excellent tour.
Oh, thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for attending. Really appreciate everybody being here.
Are you doing all the tours?
We haven't decided yet.
Okay.
Can I say something?
Sure.
So my granny and grandpa and my Aunt Betty and Uncle Jerry moved into 6833 Kedzie in 1968. And I grew up in Oak Park and grew up going to 6833 Kedzie, swimming in that pool. And, they did have mirrored wallpaper, and they had, the dining rooms were lined in mirrors because it made the room feel bigger. And my Aunt Betty and Uncle Jerry had a round couch. And it was great. It's been a part of my life forever. And it's really interesting to see what this couple has done and how they cherish the history of the building. And I was really excited when I saw that you were going to tour this place. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Ellen.
Yeah, it's.
So great job. And my Aunt Betty lived there for 42 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a long time. And they moved from Ashland and I think Albion or Loyola. They had a rental apartment there. And when they moved there, it was considered the lap of luxury. It really was. And it was high-rise living. Everything was taken care of for you. There was elevators. It was beautifully appointed. The gardens were beautiful, lots of land around it. And they felt really hoity-toity when they moved there. I remember that.
I'm sure that's the case in many situations. And I think the Hartwigs bought theirs from the original owners too. So the original owners had stayed for a long time. The Hartwigs bought theirs in 2013.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting land too, because first time I learned about it being the Brickyard, I hope you don't mind me talking about this, but it was at one of the Rogers Park Westridge Historical Society events at Indian Boundary Park when you had the photographs. And I thought, oh my God, all these years I thought, where did they get that land to build all that property? And there's so much land that isn't built on. And it was really interesting to find out that it was the Brickyards. And it totally makes sense. And it was, the buildings overall were very well run. They've got lots of parking. Parking is, nice. Every building has a swimming pool. They've got a community room. And, the shopping right across the river now. When I used to go there, it was an automobile. Oh, I think it was Motorola was over there, I think. Do you know about that? And like
Bell and Howell. I think it was Bell and Howell.
Bell and Howell, yes, a long time ago. And it's just really exciting to, know that you.
You're sounding like a real estate agent, Ellen.
I am. I've sold a lot over there. I've sold a couple properties over there, but it's just, I think it's a great opportunity. And also, I don't know if you know this, but some of the buildings allow pets, some only allow cats. There's only one building that allows dogs. And they also have Shomer Shabbos elevators. Do you know what that is?
Mm-hmm.
So they designate an elevator to stop at, if you're Orthodox and Jewish, you don't want to push a button because it's, to call the elevator. So up until they instituted the Shomer Shabbos elevators, the Orthodox community only bought on level 1, 2, and 3 so that they could walk up and down and get home and not take an elevator on Shabbat. But what they've done is I don't know if all the buildings do this, but several of them do now, where one of the elevators runs all day long on Shabbat. It goes from the first floor, second, third, all the way up to the top floor, and then comes all the way down, stopping at each floor, so you don't have to push a button. And a friend of mine just moved out of 6833, and she said that, they've got 3 elevators. So every week it rotates between a different elevator, so it doesn't overtax one of the systems, one of the particular elevators. But it's pretty cool. So it's a great community.
Hey, Donna, there is one other question that didn't make it in time, but the person is still on. And they asked if you can share where you got your old maps for the presentation.
Oh, we get them from everywhere. We've been doing all of this research online, especially since the pandemic closed down every place you could go in person to do any of this research. So if you search just for old maps, the Library of Congress has a lot of them. I don't know exactly where that one came from. I think the Library of Congress. But Google is an amazing thing that will show you all sorts of things you never knew even existed online. The resources are phenomenal these days, which thank goodness for us because of the shutdown. We would not be able to be doing this research if. Oh,
also, if you don't mind, I just wanted to let you know that if you're interested in seeing a Luxembourg farmhouse, There's one on Morris Avenue, just east of Ridge. The address is 1952 West Morris. It's a big blue building. The first floor, it was owned by the same family since the 1960s, and I recently sold it about a year ago. That's how I know about it. I didn't know what kind of architecture it was, but one of the other realtors that came through said it's a Luxembourg farmhouse, and there are a couple in Rogers Park and a couple in South Evanston, just like you said. And interesting architecture. The first floor is about a foot below ground level. There's no basement, and it's all brick. And then the second and third floor in the front house was frame. And apparently the farm animals used to live in the basement in the first floor. So, but over years they turned it into an apartment an apartment. So it's kind of cool if you want to see what that style of architecture is.
There's fascinating histories of so many buildings in this neighborhood, and we're so excited to have a vehicle for sharing what we're learning by doing these projects, because every single one that we do, we learn something new and different about the neighborhood, about the people. It's fabulous. I should have said, and I didn't, I'll promise to do it the next time. We have been, I hope we have been recording this session, and we're gonna put this.
We've been recording this, Donna. I've got it here.
Okay, good.
Yep.
We will be figuring out exactly what we're gonna do with the recording, but I think we're gonna put it accessibly on our website so that anybody can link to it any time in the future if you want to see this, or if other people want to see this tour. So watch for that. We'll announce when we've got it set up. We have to take these technical things one step at a time. Okay, are we wrapped up, or anybody have any other comments?
One thing.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you for being here. Thank you all.
Hi, Kay. One thing they didn't say, I don't know if you can hear me, they have underground parking also.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Or they have outdoor parking.
My aunt lived in 6833 also. She just had little one bedroom, so.
I think that was one of the newer ones.
Yeah.
The first
That was the one, it was the one right on Pratt.
Yeah, I think that was building 5. Yeah.
Oh, I thought, no, I think that was 2. 5 is the one in the back.
No, the one in the back is building 3.
Or 4, I don't know, but.
I don't know. I only concentrate on building.
I think 2, because it was the second one built.
Yeah, okay.
But anyway, they have underground parking there, so.
All right, well, I see people are kind of drifting away. If nobody has any other things to add, we'll just go and see you next time. Thanks for coming.
2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Donna.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye.
guys.